Welcome back, or if you're new here, my name is Alex. I am a first year vet student starting in September. I am considered a non-traditional lower GPA applicant, and I just wanted to share any of my knowledge to hopefully help somebody, just because I wish I had had as many resources as possible when I was applying. Today, I really wanted to go into discussing top 10 mistakes I made so you don't make them too. So let's get into it. First mistake that I made that I wish I'd known more about was start tracking your experiences immediately. I kind of come from an interesting situation where I did not want to be a veterinarian in senior year of high school, didn't even want it in the first year of college. I ended up transferring to the school that I did the majority of my undergrad from, and because of that I didn't really ever track my experiences. When I got to the undergrad, like basically when I decided I was going to be a pre-vet student, I should have started tracking immediately and tried to go back and like basically list the experiences I already had, but I never did. And I think that was one of my biggest regrets, because when it came to actually applying, that was one of the hardest things I had to do, was basically going back and remembering every like minute detail of where I volunteered, what I did. Obviously my job experiences were very easy to quantify. Generally you get pay stubs, so I was able to go back through my pay stubs and get the hours that I worked. But definitely, as somebody who did a lot of volunteering through college, a lot of volunteering in general, it was very difficult to go back and remember those experiences, remember how long you did them for. So however you want to do this, my personal recommendation would be maybe an Excel spreadsheet. Have the experience, or how you want to align it is probably the name of the organization that you're volunteering with or that you're doing something with, whether it's the hospital that you're shadowing at or volunteering with, an organization, a club that you're in. Basically just write it all down. So the name of that thing, your contact person for that location, so whoever is basically the person you contacted to get this set up, they're going to be your contact that you put into Vemcast. They do not generally contact these people, so if it's been a long time, you can put please do not contact. I had a situation where I had a person that I volunteered with and they closed down the rescue, so I obviously was please do not contact them. So put any contact information you have for them, whether it's an email, a phone number, something, just so that you can put it in if you eventually end up needing to. And then put the title of what you're doing, so whether that's volunteer, vet assistant, shadowing, put some sort of little tagline of what you were doing, and then try to categorize it into some sort of experience category. So there's obviously veterinary experience, animal experience, there's volunteering, there's leadership opportunities, there's clubs, there's those sorts of things. And then last two things, put how many hours you worked it or you did that thing. And then lastly, put a synopsis of everything. You can bullet point it, whatever, of everything you did. So for example, if I wanted to put the dog rescue that I volunteered for when I was at undergrad, I would basically write down all of their information. And then I would put in my synopsis, I would be walked dogs, fed dogs, bathed dogs, went to adoption events to help dogs, set up kennels, runs, built areas of the yard, cleaned up after them, socialized. Basically, I would put everything that I did at this rescue in that, so that honestly, when you go to fill out your vet school application, it should be a really quick, just bam, 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 copy and paste, copy and paste. This was my biggest regret that I did not do, because I had to do everything first time right there. I would just highly recommend, the minute you start getting experience, even if you are currently watching this video and you are 3 years into your pre-vet journey, start now. I severely regret not doing this, because sitting down and having to basically figure all this stuff out years later was kind of awful. So that's what I would do. But yeah, that's my first biggest recommendation. Start tracking your experiences immediately. It will just make your life so much easier, because applying to vet school is so long and time consuming that you're going to want any sort of tips and tricks to just like speed things up a little bit. My second recommendation, when I first was looking into applying to vet school, I will be honest and say that there wasn't probably as big of an online community as there is now. It was just with the change of the times. I didn't know at the time these things were around, but I do know that they were. I just should have looked harder, I guess. Try to find pre-vet communities online that you can join, because those are going to be the places that you can ask specific questions about the school. Like, you'll be able to talk to other pre-vet students, current veterinary students, and past veterinary students, and sometimes even like alum faculty. You never know who's lurking on here. So my caveat is, please always be the best of the best person you can be, because you never know who's looking. But these can be some of your biggest resources, because you can ask questions to people who are actively going through this, have gone through that school's program, have done anything that is going to be almost an inside look that you're not going to get just looking at their website. I hate to say it. I think vet schools' websites have a lot of information, especially about like what they're required to apply. But when you really want to start looking at it and being like, okay, what's your school curriculum like? What's your day-to-day when you start vet school? What should I be expecting as a student? You want to talk to actual students first and foremost. So find these pre-vet communities. For example, some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head are like the AVMA Facebook page. As well, for somebody like me, I just found this recently, and it is a newer Facebook page, but the low GPA non-traditional vet student Facebook page was huge. That was something that I wish was around when I was first applying, as somebody who did come out of undergrad with a lower GPA. And then the Student Doctor Network, I will put the caveat of Student Doctor Network is, please do not compare yourself to other people. I think it is really easy to get into a hole, and I did this for multiple years. I would look at people, I think Student Doctor Network was like the first community I ever found, fortunately or unfortunately. I didn't join for a very long time, which is also a regret of mine, because I think in this past year from when I did join and actually become an active participating like commenter and member of the website, I would just look at people's stats and like compare myself and get in this hole and everything. So I say use Student Doctor Network with a grain of salt. You can get yourself into a really tricky situation because you're comparing yourself and being like, well, this person had this, but I have this, like, why didn't I get in? Why did they get in? Or like, you know, the vice versa of like, well, I got in here, why didn't they get in here? And you can just get into such a bad headspace so quickly that I would just heavily caution, be careful. The pros of Student Doctor Network definitely outweighed all of the cons for me. It just took me a while to get out of that like kind of repeating cycle of comparing myself to everyone. Ultimately, your application is going to be so different from another person's that you really just can't compare. The parts that I loved about Student Doctor Network were you can find out pretty quickly when people are hearing back for things, like whether they're getting interview invites, whether they're getting acceptance letters, denials, you know, that sort of thing. People will post on there. You can talk to other students that are currently in the program. Like the school that I ultimately decided on going to, I got to ask like, oh, what do you think your typical day-to-day is? How do you feel about the school? Some people have some really, really great opinions. Some people have some really harsh opinions. Some people did not have the best experience in vet school, at particular vet schools or anything. I wouldn't just take one person's word off of it, whether it's a really good word or whether it's a really bad word. So every school works differently for other people. You can do essentially whatever you want, but I think it is a really good tool. But those are some of the places I joined, and when I actively started participating in them, and I got so much more out of it than when I was scared to say anything because I was embarrassed. I think that's the biggest thing, is seeding your embarrassment so that you can grow and learn. And that's what I had to learn, was realizing that, you know, there's nothing I can do at this present moment about my GPA. I tried, but let me speak to people who are knowledgeable and in my community and understand what I'm going through, who can maybe give me some advice. Third thing, the other mistake I made was, so my family is originally from Canada. So the American schooling system is kind of an enigma to my parents. And because of that, I really did not have a lot of like help just in general with like any college questions. I had to figure it out myself or go to academic advisors or stuff like that. And what I realized, probably too late, was that a random academic advisor, because at my school that I went to, your academic advisor was one given to you based on the college that you were in. By college, I mean like within our university, we had like College of Math and Sciences, we had the College of like Art and Design and all of that stuff. So I was part of obviously the College of Math and Sciences, and then within that, I was given an advisor based on my last name. So he saw, you know, A through M, whatever. When I went to him, I very quickly realized he knew nothing about vet school, like absolutely nothing. And while I will say this is my personal experience going to a school that does not have a veterinary program, I have also seen a lot of people say the same thing, is that their pre-advisor for anything did not really know what they were talking about. I got to the point where our advisor for my pre-vet club was also an advisor in that building. I would basically go to my advisor, get my registration code from him after he wrote whatever he wanted on a little sheet of paper about planning my next semester, and then I would just walk next door to her and I would get her advice, because at least she knew more about vet school. So, but at the end of the day, I would always say take your academic advisor's advice with a grain of salt, especially if they are not even remotely trained in pre-vet, veterinary, whatever. And the caveat I also add to that is, even if they are trained in pre-med, pre-dental, or any of those things, those are so vastly different. Maybe not vastly, but they are very different from applying for VEMCAS and applying for vet school. So I would just say very much, please do your research. Again, these Facebook pages that I talked about, the APVMA, which is the American Pre-Veterinary Medical Association Facebook, or the Low GPA Non-Trad Facebook, or the Student Doctor Network, these are all good places that you can post questions if you have them, which is like, what should I take if my college only offers this? Or what should I do here? You have to be your own advocate, and that can be very hard when you don't really know what the question that you're looking to ask. I always try to start at, look at what schools, especially your in-state, what they require class list wise, and then go based off of that for anything else. Most schools that you're applying to for vet school require the same things for the most part. Some schools require an additional like medical terminology class. Some schools require animal nutrition and animal science class. So look at what your in-state is, because that's going to give you the cheapest tuition if you get in, and then go from there. Next thing, do not overextend yourself. When I transferred to my school, I had multiple different things that kind of like played into this, but I was terrified of, one, not making friends, two, being behind because I not started my pre-veterinary journey, and all of these things. So I basically threw myself into everything. The first year was probably the most tame I was, which is crazy. But then the next years following, I was in like so many clubs. I was like president of my pre-veterinary club for 2 years. I was in a sorority. I was in another like biological honor society. I was volunteering all these different places, and I was taking a crap ton of classes. This was so bad. I look back and I go, what was I thinking? Personally, I don't think anyone could have talked me out of it. However, I am going to try to impart some wisdom, which is, I wish I had focused just on school. I was so concerned. I had heard so many times you need to be this perfect, well-rounded applicant. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to be behind, like all this stuff. I already had a jump start because I worked at a vet hospital my whole senior year of high school. Every break that I went back, I was working at a vet hospital, and they were training me to do like vet assistant things. I was ahead of the curve without realizing it. So I really could have just calmed down. I tend to give all or nothing and put everyone else's priorities above my own. So when I was pre-vet club president, I was so concerned with trying to make everything perfect without focusing on myself and my grades, and that just made everything fail. So just learn from me, realize that you should not overextend yourself. I was somewhat raised with the mentality that don't be a quitter or whatever. I hate that phrase now. Be a quitter. If something is not fulfilling you, or it's taking away from what's most important, and by this I mean is get good grades. So learn from me. Be mindful. If you can do it all, you're amazing. This kind of goes into what I just said. Focus on school. Focus. This really seems like a no-brainer, but I will say this. It is so hard to come back from a bad GPA or a lower GPA or anything than it is to have a good GPA, have very little hours, get rejected for little hours, and then reapply next year when you get more hours. It is very easy to go and just get hours over the summer, to volunteer after you've graduated. That to me, I wish that was the case. I graduated with, I think, like a max at my university of it was like a 3.1 cumulative, which VMCAS always like tanks your grades because of how they do their GPA cuts. But I had max a 3.1, I think, cumulative, and, you know, probably like 5,000 veterinary experience hours and nothing to show for it. So I would much have preferred maybe to get, I don't know, a 3.6 and have 1,000 vet hours. GPA is still something that the colleges very much care about, and just focus on your school versus like, oh, I need to go volunteer at that thing to get this like large animal experience. Like, you can do that during the summer. Promise you. It'll be just as valuable. That is my mistake that I made that I wish I could go back and change. This is another thing that was really difficult for me. Try to make 1 to 2 close professor relationships, or at least get close with your academic advisor. I was saved that I did research with one professor last year, and so I had her be able to write me a recommendation for multiple years for different things. I also was close with my academic advisor to the point that I still talk to her. And for the most cases, academic advisors can write letters of recommendation or professors. So if you do not think you can make a good relationship with a professor, reach out to your academic advisor, but try to make at least one. I am somebody who was very difficult for me to reach out to professors. I had a bad experience in a class in undergrad where I basically had a professor call me stupid in front of everyone. I probably should have gone to the dean and written him up at the time. I did feel stupid because I was struggling in the class, even though I was at all these extra help sessions, and it was during a help session that he called me stupid, that I felt stupid and I let him make me stupid. So I had a really hard time reaching out to professors and asking them for help and asking them for stuff. If I did particularly well in a class or I stood out, then I was able to talk to them. But really try to find a professor that cares about you, that wants you to succeed. The next mistake, or something that I wish I did more, was doing your research. From what I remember of initially applying to vet school, it is like being dropped on a beach, on a barren beach, and being told, okay, go. And it's like looking for Treasure Island. You're not given any instructions, you're not given any maps or anything, you're just being told to go. And that is how I feel the VMCAS application is sometimes, because it is literally so overwhelming. I got so excited to apply, and then immediately overwhelmed with the amount of things you have to fill out on VMCAS that I just felt like my brain just stopped working. So by this I mean, really try to make sure you're making decisions that make sense. I made some decisions that made 0 sense. Because I remember my first year, I set a plan that I was going to apply to all the schools around Georgia, because I did not want to leave around this radius of the South, just because my family is down here. I applied to schools that there was no hope I was going to get into. With my GPA, with everything, like University of Tennessee invites 15 out-of-state students, 20 maybe, I can't remember. NC State doesn't look at anyone that has less than a 3.4 GPA in all 3 of their categories for GPA. So there was like so many schools that I applied to. Made no sense. So look into the schools you're applying to. When a school has a hard limit, the best example of that is NC State with their 3.4 GPA for out-of-state students in all 3 of their GPA categories. They mean that. It is 3.4. It is not 3.39. It's not 3.3. It's not going to round up. If you don't have a 3.4 in all 3 of those categories for out-of-state, they're going to throw out your application. You're basically just paying them a fee. It's just one of those things where it's like, please do your research. Same thing with schools that require other courses. I see all the time with people who apply to schools that require like a medical terminology course or schools that apply and need an animal science or an animal nutrition course, or schools that require the GRE. Because now it's a little interesting where most schools don't require the GRE anymore, and some schools do. So if you miss that little thing, you're kind of like, well, crap, I needed the GRE. So just make sure you do your research. That is so important and vital so that you do not waste your money, first and foremost, or your time, because there's no point in filling out essays for a school that you're not going to go to, or you're not going to get into, unfortunately, because they're just going to throw out your applications. Hard requirements are hard requirements. There's no budging. I think when I first applied, I was like, oh, well, there has to be wiggle room. There's not. The other side of that, when I didn't get in the first time, I was so adamant that I had to do something in between when I got rejected to my next application. And I also was so terrified of not applying the immediate next cycle, which was such a disservice to myself. I wish I had done other things. Do your research. Look into it before you do anything. Do not be afraid to take a break, take a gap cycle. I did. I took a gap between my third application and my fourth application. I think it was the world of difference. The next advice I have is please be realistic. Please. I was not to myself. Some of these veterinary communities that I mentioned, if you really want the hard truth, they will give it to you. And I wish I had earlier. But some of the things is like, if a school has a posted cutoff GPA, they're not going to budge on that. Like I said before, they're really not. Be realistic. Do not apply to them if you have below that. VMCAS is likely going to calculate your GPA lower. That is like a pretty sure thing that they're going to do. The same thing of just like, do not apply to schools that you do realistically would not go to. I can do a better video on like deciding schools to apply to and what to look for and what questions to ask yourself. But the biggest thing is, for example, if you are living in one state and you have your whole life there, you have a husband, kids, husband and wife, whatever, you have kids, you have a house, you have, a business there, your whole family's there, your mother's, not doing well and she's there. And then you're applying to schools completely across the United States, knowing that you would probably will not do well being that far from home, or that you have historically never done well being that far from home. I think you're just doing yourself a disservice and wasting money, because you will never realistically go to that school. And again, I don't know that for you, but I would just say make sure you do your research and apply to the schools that you want to go to. Something I learned pretty quickly for myself is that I'll go to some schools within reason. When I first applied, I did not have a dog, so I applied everywhere. I applied overseas. I didn't get in and it didn't work out, but when I applied subsequent years, I have a dog now, and I could not justify going to Australia or any of those places where I had to bring him because he's a big dog. It just was not going to work. So that kind of limited the places that I could apply to, and that was me being realistic, and I love him. I want him to be with me, so I have to now narrow the scope of where I'm going to apply because of my decisions, which is fine. I've had people who applied a bunch of places and then looked at the prices and realized that I do this, I only want to go to my in-state school. Please look at the prices, look at what the interest rates currently are. There's a lot of resources out there, on the VIN Foundation and other places where you can literally calculate what it would be like to go to XYZ school, and then what your loans would look like in 10, 20 years times of how much it would take for you to pay them off. So I would 100% recommend looking into that and just trying to figure out if this is the right path for you, because you'll save money not applying to those schools. This kind of goes into another conversation that's not even a mistake, because I do pride myself on having this, but please talk to whoever your support system is, like whoever is going to be helping you or helping pay for this or anything, whether that's your parents, your partner, your grandparents, your aunt, your uncle, whoever, please talk to them and actually talk to them about finances. I have seen so much recently that people don't talk to these people that are supporting them and actually get the hard truth. I think that is the biggest thing. When you are potentially entering into thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, I think you need the hard truth. And if you can't have that sit down discussion with someone, it worries me a little bit. So I would sit down, have that discussion, try to figure out what works for you guys if you can handle the out-of-state tuition. If you can't, then, you know, I would really try to tailor your application to in-state and really hope for that. And if you don't get in that first application cycle, then I would definitely meet with them in-state schools admissions team and try to figure out what you can do to fix for the next round so that you're the perfect applicant. But yeah, please be realistic, please. It'll save you money, it'll save you time, it'll save you heartache, promise. So the next thing I struggled with, and I wish somebody had told me before, is if you are struggling in undergrad or in a class specifically. So this, I think I kind of already touched on this, but if you're struggling, please reach out and get help, talk to your professor. But if you are really struggling and you do not think you are getting it, you don't think you're going to do well in the class, you know, and you have the time, please drop the class and take a W. I think the thing that really messed me up is, nobody told me this, is I was like, oh my gosh, W's are terrible. Like, what if they, you know, like they're not going to like that, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying take 20 W's by any means. Use meaning withdraws, like withdraw from the class before it's over. In my personal opinion, W's ended up being so much better than an F. I had a hardcore disagreement with a professor one year, and my only F that I've ever received in college. Yes, I had an F and I got into vet school. I wish I dropped. I wish I had. I stuck it out. I was like convinced I'm going to do better. I'm going to bring it up. I'm not going to get an F. I got an F. I wish I had dropped it. I did not like the professor. I did not like how he taught things. I ended up taking the same class at a different school and passed it with flying colors. There are going to be classes that, one, you are just not good at. I can 100% say physics, that's not even a class I got the F in, which is surprising, but I can 100% say physics is one of those classes for me. I am terrible at physics. Just the mechanics of it, the formulas, everything, it boggles my brain. It really does. And it's unfortunate, but that's life. If you know there's classes that are coming up that are going to be difficult and you're not doing well and you're getting close to that point where you have to make that decision of, am I just going to tough it out or am I going to drop it? I wish someone had said that to me. Again, I'm not saying get 20 W's, but like maybe be a little more loosey-goosey with it. I wish I dropped some more classes just to get them off my plate, because I probably would have done better in other classes. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, I wish somebody had given me that advice. I'm now giving you that advice. My final thing that I'm going to end with, and this is probably controversial, maybe, I don't really know. You do not have to stay in vet med if you are not surviving. And pause, listen before you click off. What I mean by this is, if you are struggling to live, eat, sleep, and breathe while working a vet med job, you do not have to stay in vet med. I was so brainwashed into thinking that if I left vet med and I was not getting hours in vet med my whole time while I was applying, that I was going to be thrown out as this like fake, as this heathen who didn't love vet med, or I don't know, which I know sounds ridiculous, but that's how I felt, is like if I left vet med and I wasn't getting hours, that they were going to look on me poorly. I got to a point where I was doing a master's program, I was working 3 jobs, and I was miserable. And that was just to make ends meet. I literally didn't have any time to do anything. I didn't have a life. I was working the worst hours of all my jobs. And of course this fell during COVID, but I was doing probably the worst of everything. And so I was probably the deepest pit of depression ever. I was not making very much money. And it was literally just so that I could live paycheck to paycheck, so that I could eat and that I could live in the house I was living in. And I had roommates and everything. I was on the struggle bus. I was about to finish that master's that coming December. And summer of 2021, I found a job that was work from home that instantly paid $20,000 more than I was making in vet med, in one of my vet med jobs. And this job was completely outside of vet med. Like, I mean, full on corporate America. Nothing to do with dogs, had nothing to do with animals in general. And I took it and I was like, I just screwed myself. I literally screwed myself. Like, they're never gonna look at me. Even knowing that people have applied from alternative everything, who have had career changes, who have had everything, I was just like so convinced that this was gonna be the death of me. But ultimately, It gave me the headspace to focus on my applications, to do another master's program. I ended up taking a cycle break, and then reapplying. I was able to completely pay for a master's program while also living very comfortably because of this job, which is great. I was able to get savings, all of these things, and ultimately reapply, which was this past cycle where I got into 6 schools. This job gave me a lot of leadership opportunities, gave me a lot of ways that I could talk or answer questions in the behavioral interviews that I had. It gave me a lot of opportunities. Plus, it just gave me money. It gave me money to be comfortable. And as somebody who did the struggle bus for years, if you have to make that decision to leave vet med, and this is, let me be perfectly honest, I love vet med. Obviously, I'm going back to vet school. I loved my job. I loved everything that I did. I loved all the people I was around. I loved the things that I was learning. I loved my patients. I loved everything. I would have stayed if I could have made, I don't know, even $5,000 more. It was just one of those things where it was not going to get better, but that's like a whole other story. But all I'm saying is you can love vet med and realize that you need a break. And I think what I was able to portray in all of my interviews and my essays and everything was that this breakaway really helped me figure out how much I love vet med and how much I wanted to be back in it, and the things that I wanted to bring back to vet med to try and help some of the areas that I deem need some help. That's all I'm saying is, if you have to, if you need to, if you are struggling, if you are not surviving, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, because I get it, I've been on those vet assistant checks, please, 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 please consider going and working in another field just to at least live. I think it was one of the best decisions I actually ever made. I was able to also get a pretty significant savings from it that I'm now bringing into vet school, and it is helping me in my first year, which was always my goal. So if you ever have any questions about this or my journey or anything, please let me know. Anyways, have a good night or day or week. Have a good life.
You should know yourself. Know yourself. When the lines have been seen, it's what's written in